This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. Like many people, I've come into the new year full of hopes and aspirations for the next 12 months. Maybe, like me, you're anxiously pacing the floor waiting for the F1 season to begin, or perhaps you've set yourself a more regular fitness goal, like running your first marathon or commuting to work by bike. Whatever you plan to do in 2025, come into your own way with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Powered by Live Hydroscience, Liquid IV helps you break the mould. Liquid IV is so easy and convenient to tear, pour and enjoy, and it comes in several fantastic flavours, like their new Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free Raspberry Lemonade, and other winners like White Peach and Rainbow Sherbet. As a regular flyer, I know how easy it is to become dehydrated, almost without knowing it, when you're travelling. That's why I always take Liquid IV on overseas trips. It's more than just a drink, and it's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water provides 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients. And what's more, it's always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THEATHLETIC. Make your first deposit of at least $10, place your first bet on any game, and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
The Athletic.
Welcome to a special bonus peek behind the curtain of the Race Members Club. To mark the first race of the season and the fact that our special offer of 90% off your first month's membership of the Race Members Club closes on Wednesday, March 19th, here's a chance for those on the outside to hear just one example of the kind of extra content you will get. Many of you will know that I put together the driver rankings after every Grand Prix. The Race Members Club members have a read and can put questions to me on Patreon. I then, at the first opportunity, dive in and work my way through those questions in a video on Patreon. It's a good example of the kind of more informal content that's available on the Race Members Club, but also actually just one example of what we're putting out there. So have a listen, and if you enjoy it and it sounds like the Race Members Club is for you, move fast and you can sign up to our special 90% off your first month's membership offer. Just click on the link in the episode description or head to Patreon and search for The Race. And now I'll hand over to myself, Ed Straw, to talk about my driver rankings. Welcome to the first driver rankings Q&A of 2025 for the Race Members Club. We started doing this at the back end of last year. It seems to be quite popular and I certainly enjoyed doing it. So we're going to do it every race this year when you get the chance to look at my rankings 1 to 20 and ask questions, challenge, ask a little bit about the process, anything as long as it's specifically related to the rankings, and then I will come to the questions. I haven't done any preparation and let you know what I think. So let's get straight into it. First up, a question from Rio. 9th in the rankings is extremely kind to Piastri, and I say this as an Australian who has had a long-term interest in his career. Given what he did show, how do you rate the likelihood of Oscar taking it to Lando over the year? Yeah, well, 9th I didn't think was too kind. I think you could have argued he could have been higher even. It all depends how much you excuse what happened to him on lap 44. Both he and Norris made the mistake. Norris was just on the right side of it and lived to fight another day. Piastri lost a heap of time, spun in the grass, and then that ruined his race. But because they were the first drivers that encountered that particular level of grip, I'll not give Piastri a completely free pass because Norris showed you could get away with it. But there's a little bit of well, you were quite unfortunate there with him. But as to the actual question, I think Oscar can take it to Lando. I think he was very close to doing that in Australia. Norris had that little bit of a toe in qualifying, under a tenth the gap anyway, so Piastri was pushing him hard. And obviously in the race there was that phase when Norris was under pressure from Piastri and there was the team orders because they were worried about back markers and what the weather was going to do. So Piastri was certainly keen to take the fight to Norris there, and I think he can do. He's a very quick driver. I don't think the Piastri we saw at the back end of last season, who struggled a little bit, is where we'll see him this season. And I have no doubt that if he can consistently push Norris on pace, then that ruthlessness, that ice coolness about Piastri is going to be a very, very valuable weapon. So I'm fascinated to see how that battle goes. Next up, a question from Alex Hinley. How much does a practice spin lock up into the runoff area impact rankings? Does it depend on damage and out of the session? Yeah, consequences do play a part in that. Ultimately, practice is for that. Let's take George Russell as an example. He had 2 offs on Friday. One of them, FP3, dropped FP1 even. He dropped a wheel on the grass and spun at turn 3, which is a bit cack-handed, really. Shouldn't really be doing that, but wasn't ultimately hugely costly. And he had another one on the afternoon on Friday, which happened actually right in front of me, briefly locked up, released, went up the escape road and rejoined. And actually having that trip up the escape road protected the tyre a bit rather than just letting the lock-up massively play out. I heard the lock-up, it was really, really brief, so he kind of needed to do that. But generally speaking, if you are in the wall, if you're costing yourself track time, that is a problem. And the most extreme case is when, as Ollie Behrman did, you have one crash and then you have another. And that FP3 one he had, when on his first flying lap, he put a wheel onto the grass entering turn 11 and ended his session. That was pretty horrible. I think when you've crashed in FP1, missed FP2, and you desperately need to get some track time in, to do that on your first flying lap is inexcusable for any driver. Everyone has that kind of mistake in them, but that really heavily counted against Behrman and meant he was always going to be pretty lowly ranked in this. So it does depend on outcome, and you can argue that's a little bit cruel, but also the driver has a certain control over mitigating what happens. And sometimes 2 drivers who have seemingly exactly the same spin and one ends up in the wall, one doesn't. Sometimes there will be a little bit of driver skill in it, although sometimes it is just dumb luck. Question from Michael Holden. Playing hypothetical here. Let's pretend that when Lando and Oscar ran wide, it was Lando who beached his car, got it going again and came 9th, whilst Oscar went on to win. What would you have ranked them then? That's a good question. I would say, I mean, you suggest in your question it would have been Oscar 3rd and Lando 7th. That's not bad, actually. I think that's possible. It's really hard for me to say absolutely where they'd have ended up, because the way I tend to do it is I sort of group drivers at certain levels and then you shuffle them around based on little tiebreakers and that kind of thing. So I would say Piastri would have been certainly in the top 4. 3rd seems reasonable. 3rd actually does seem about right. Lando 7th seems about okay, but you could also say, well, he ultimately threw away the race win, so maybe it would have been similar to Piastri, because Piastri had a really, really strong weekend, and then that happened. Norris was the same, so maybe Lando would have been 8th or so, but it's really hard to say with certainty. We'll get back to the podcast in a moment, but first, let me tell you about Grammarly. Your time and expertise are valuable, and with professionals spending nearly half the work week on written communication, focus is one of the most important things to have at work. With Grammarly as your AI writing partner, you can stay focused and get through your work faster with relevant, real-time suggestions wherever you write. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster with AI prompts, tone suggestions, and more. And what's more, you can enjoy it with peace of mind with Grammarly's enterprise-grade security and its business model that doesn't sell your data. Experience the gold standard of responsible AI with Grammarly, a tool that 93% of professionals report helps them get more work done. So what are you waiting for? Get more done with Grammarly. Download Grammarly free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast.
This season, a new hot deal has arrived at Metro. $25 a line for 4 lines with all the data you need and 4 free Samsung Galaxy A15 5G phones. Getting Metro's best deals is easy. No ID required, no activation fees. Get a new number or keep your own. It's up to you. That's 4 lines for $25 a line, plus 4 free phones. Visit a store or go online today. Only at Metro by T-Mobile.
When you join Metro Plus Tax. For a limited time and subject to change. Max 1 offer per account.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Rob Fuller question now. Given it was a fairly calamitous race for most of the rookies in the rain, how would your rookies' rankings have differed if you'd made a decision based on qualifying alone? That's a good question. Qualifying alone, the order would have been 1, Jack Doohan. Impressively quick. Unlucky in Q2 as well. He hit the yellow flag on his final run, and he was within something like 300ths of Gasly. It was raining in Kentucky. He might well have made Q3. He might well have beaten Gasly in qualifying. Really, really impressive. Doohan on pure speed was the most impressive of the rookies. I would say then it would be Bortoletto. Getting into Q2 was pretty impressive. The crash in the race obviously counts against him, but up to that point, just looking at practice, really good from Bortoletto to haul that car in, even though Q2 went a bit wrong. Third, I'd have Hajar, who did impress me with his pace. There was still kind of a gap there to Tsunoda. Everyone looked, I think he was 6th on Friday afternoon, but there was still a gap there. Really good, but I think that wasn't as impressive as what Doohan did, or quite as eye-catching as Bortoletto, but still a good debut for Hajar on Friday and Saturday. Then 4th, Antonelli, simply because qualifying went wrong. He did the damage when he ran wide at turn 6 and meant he was eliminating Q1, so he has to be 4th. And then Oliver Behrman has to be 5th because of what he did in FP1 and FP3. Michael Sanderson has a question now. Martin Brundle described this as one of the all-time great wins from Lando Norris. I personally thought that was overkill, and you ranked him 2nd behind Albon. So where do you stand on the quality of Norris's victory in relation to other great wins, and what could he have done to secure top spots? One of the all-time great wins, for me, that's a bit of a stretch. I don't think it's in that bracket. It's a very good win. Obviously, if he hadn't had the off and the nasty moment, if he hadn't particularly late on had that wide moment at turn 6, that may have created a little bit of floor damage. In fact, McLaren haven't confirmed exactly where that came from. It either came from lap 44, the gravel trap trip, or hitting that turn 6 curb late on, which is the point where Verstappen was pressuring him. So I'd have liked Norris to have never really been under a little bit of threat from Verstappen for it to be in that calibre. But I think even then, all-time great wins, all-time great wet weather wins. We're thinking Schumacher, Spain 96, Senna, Estoril 85, Stewart, Nürburgring 68, Hamilton, Silverstone 2008, Senna, Donington 93. I mean, we all can reel off those great wet wins. I don't think it was quite in that class because those were extraordinary. Very good, but yeah, all-time great wins. I disagree with that, much as I respect Martin Brundle's opinion on most things. Jan Alexander next says, it can't always be clear how much influence a driver had on strategy choices. So do you hold a poor tyre call against a driver every time, only when it's clear they were actively pushing for said call, or never because the focus is on the driving? Very, very good question. It depends on their contribution to the decision, let's say. So I will look at what circumstances the decision happened. So let's say some of those drivers who came in on lap 44, which was, it turned out, the right lap to pit. That was the lap the McLarens went off on. Most of them were called in by the team. Nico Hulkenberg, for example, he benefited from it. He was called in. Wasn't really his call at all. Lance Stroll, the same. He was called in. Wasn't his call. He said that himself after the race. Norris had already been told once the rain wets the track, I think was the phrase Andrea Stella used, to pit in. But I was impressed that Norris, in amongst that running wide, that trying to gather the car up and not fall behind Verstappen, he did have the presence of mind to dive into the pits. Maybe last year he wouldn't have done that. Who knows? So it depends on my judgment of their contribution to that call and how good their feedback is. Tsunoda was an interesting case. I'll always, when there's these calls happening, watch the onboards of the drivers. And Tsunoda, the pit wall was a little bit wobbly there. Tsunoda probably could have made a more insistent call there. What slightly hurt Tsunoda in that phase is he actually had a bite of the gravel at turn 11 the second time he went through, so he already knew it was tricky there, which wasn't ideal. So it entirely depends. I'll try and judge multiple factors. What feedback does the driver give that they're not giving? How good's their communication? What knowledge can they have? A good example, looking back, for example, a lot of people criticised Norris in Sochi in 21, that famous race he led a large amount of, and then the rain came. But although he was perhaps not the most cooperative in communication, his call was correct based on what he could see. He didn't know there was a second bank of rain coming, because that was what made all the difference. Because actually, and I've gone through this in granular detail, his pace is absolutely fine until that second bank of rain hits. It was about 40 seconds after the last one. That was a problem Lewis Hamilton, for example, had as well. So it's another one of those it depends questions. Sometimes drivers have the capacity to make that call. Sometimes they don't. One that leaps to mind was when Jenson Button won the Hungarian Grand Prix. He was running behind Hamilton, if memory serves. McLaren called both drivers in for rain because of rain. Hamilton came in. Button said nope, and he won the race because that was his judgment. So that's a good example of when you have clear proof that the driver has made the call. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, and sometimes you don't have all the information. You can watch the onboards, you can ask the team, you can ask the driver, but you don't necessarily get the complete picture. Next question, Chris Parrott. Do you keep a pound-for-pound driver ranking list, either in your mind or actually? And who do you expect to have the highest average ranking this year? That's a good question. I mean, obviously, pound for pound, I try and make the rankings by pound for pound. I'd mean relative to their machinery. The big problem is with rankings, and Esteban Ocon's a good example for Australia. Every driver's mission is a little bit different, and sometimes that's within their power, sometimes it isn't. So there's an element in terms of the rankings that drivers can have access to being ranked ahead of others just because of circumstances. For example, you could look at George Russell and say, well, he maximised the car completely, so why wasn't he number one? Well, he also, by his own admission, knew that he couldn't do anything about Verstappen or the McLaren, so just sort of settled down to do his own race, didn't overdo it, played it a bit conservatively. So really good, but he didn't have the massive pressure that Lando Norris had. He didn't have that pushing on a car that had a deficit to threaten the winners that Max Verstappen had. He didn't have that Alex Albon element of, struggling a bit with the car at time with wins. Albon said he was never comfortable for one moment in that race. So that gives you a bit of an idea of that. The rankings I do track, but I avoid looking at the averages because I'm conscious that looking at the averages might influence me to adjust what rankings happen sort of subconsciously to help a driver I think should be higher or whatever. So normally I'll look at the average rankings in the summer break and at the end of the year, and it's useful to have. So as for that pound for pound driver ranking list, you have an idea of who's doing well in the lesser cars, but it's not that different to the overall ranking really, because that's part of it. Right, a question from Rich Snape. What's harder, going from one team to another and having to unlearn a number of car traits and learn a set of new ones, which seems to catch Carlos Sainz out, and Hamilton has talked about extensively as his key challenge, or being a brand new F1 driver who doesn't have the same unlearning to do, but doesn't have the large bank of experience to draw on? I think it's definitely the rookie driver, not having the experience. You should adapt. I mean, Carlos Sainz has changed teams many, many times, so he knows what he's going through. He knows the things that he can encounter. So the data bank is just so much fuller. So I would say it's always harder for the rookie driver in pretty much all circumstances. The only time that might be different is if you have, I don't know, a experienced driver leaping into a completely unfamiliar car at the last second or something. Stuart Coulter says, in some ways, were the bottom 5 drivers harder to rank than the top 5 this weekend? I don't disagree with who's in your bottom 5, as they all made extremely bad errors at one point. But how did you differentiate whose error was worse than someone else's? That's an interesting question, and it is one that I can give a very, very clear answer on. But I'm going to have to get the ranking up just to make sure that I get them in the right order. Now, 20th I had Isaac Hajar, and that was purely because spinning on the formation lap, even rookie status, even these tyres are horrible, the conditions, everything, spinning into the wall and not being able to start the race is cardinal sin number 1. And I feel really sorry for him, and he did well in practice, but any driver who does that, that's going to pretty much obliterate their rating. And then I had Carlos Sainz, because second on the criminal offences in rankings is crashing under safety car conditions, which is what Carlos Sainz did. So those two being the bottom 2, that was pretty easy. It then got a little bit harder because you had Ollie Behrman 18th, Liam Lawson 17th, Fernando Alonso 16th, Jack Doohan 15th, and Gabriel Bortoleto 14th. And I've gone up to Bortoleto because they all had crashes. I felt that Behrman's FP3 off in particular was unforgivable. And that kind of meant he was always going to be the bottom of the mistake-making drivers in normal circumstances, if you like. You could easily put him below Sainz or Hajar, but I just thought those were just such inexcusable errors. Liam Lawson obviously had several offs in qualifying. He had the crash in the race. He was slow. You could have made an argument for Liam Lawson being lower. I think Lawson probably just gained a little bit from it being his first time at Albert Park. Tough scenario in the Red Bull, but still a pretty awful weekend. Fernando Alonso just made a mistake in qualifying and a mistake in the race. What I'd call normal crash mistakes. So he was 16th and he was below Doohan because A, Alonso made a mistake in qualifying as well, and B, Alonso has 6,500 Grand Prix experience and Jack Doohan's in his second Grand Prix weekend. And Bortoleto I just sort of had the most sympathy for. That was also partly because there's that lingering question about whether did he have a little bit of car damage. Was that failure that we saw of the left rear as he was just about completing the spin that happened cause or effect? It could well have been effect of the spin because you load up you load everything up weirdly when you're spinning and you get a direction change and everything. So it could well have been that. But he ended up 14th there. So that was fairly easy. And actually pretty much the first thing I did was create 3 groups of drivers in doing the ranking, which was kind of all the ones that made those big errors, and they sort of those are your bottom 7 as it were. There were 4 drivers who kind of went in contention for number 1 bucket, and then there was that middle group. So that's the first thing. You get a little vague shape, and then you start ordering it within that. So, right, the next question comes from Simon Ems. Did the fact that Alonso and Sainz made rookie errors inform how you rated the rookies who made rookie errors? When I saw Hajar and Doohan crash out, I recognised how tricky the conditions were when Sainz did the same. I don't think it really informed them. The trouble is with rookie errors is they will happen. So I understand Hajar having that off he had, but it just still shouldn't happen. And the rankings, I do take into account people being rookies, but they just become inexcusable moments, shall we say. Alonso's crash was a normal racing crash. Hajar's wasn't, Sainz's wasn't. So, I think it's just a reminder. It's phenomenally difficult in these conditions. Formula One drivers are so good. It's incredible what they do. I know we talk about it all the time and criticise mistakes and analyse technique. It is absolutely phenomenal how good they are. In the wet, I have no idea how they do it, to be quite honest. And I say that as someone who in my amateur club racing career loved racing in the wet, but this is 50,000 levels removed of that. To do that in these cars with the way these tyres are, with the power you've got, it's phenomenal. So I think I already know it's very, very difficult, but it's part of the job. You keep the car on the island. That's the number one thing you have to do. Next up, a question from Ranch Dingus. If you had to say in percentages what the race weighed in comparison to practice and quali, how would I do that? Yeah, again, this is an interesting question because in an ideal world, it would be... Just kicking my chair. In an ideal world, it would be good to have a really set metric. And I have sort of experimented with this. And you think, right, qualifying is, let's say qualifying's 30%, the race is 70%. Or you have a dash in for practice or something. But it depends. Qualifying's lap 0 of the race. And that does carry a lot of weight. Because otherwise you get into the stupid situation of, let's say someone messes up qualifying, starts 15th and charges through to second, and their teammate wins from pole. Well, who's had the better race? Well, the driver who's gone from down the grid to second has probably had the better race, the harder race, but it's their own fault they're there, and they've ultimately underachieved. So I think this is my answer to so many things. It depends. It's why this is such an inexact science, because it purely depends on the mission, on the driver happens to face, the circumstances that are there, and the way things play out. But I do consider qualifying to be part of the race effectively. Practice is a little bit easier to detach. So yeah, in comparison to practice, I mean, put it this way, I would say there's obviously a little bit more weighting towards the race because the race is longer. There's more opportunity for things to happen. But purely on an either or, if a driver, say, crashed in qualifying and had a good race, they're likely to be ranked better than a driver who crashed in the race but starred in qualifying. So that probably answers it. It's at least weighted slightly more towards the race.
What's my subscription to the New York Times have me doing this week? Preparing a strawberry pretzel pie. Solving spelling bee with no hints. Planning a trip to one of the 52 best places to go. Getting to the bottom of the big pants trend.
Whoa.
And I'm finally replacing my vacuum with a recommendation I can trust. What will your subscription to the Times have you do? Why not find out? With our best offer, go to nytimes.com/subscribe.
What up, y'all? Zena Kata here with a huge announcement. We're dropping a new show. No off-season, The Athletic Women's Basketball Show. Same place, same time, but we're bringing the heat with some brand new energy. Join myself, Ben, Chantel, and Sabrina as we give you an inside look at the game with candid conversations, in-depth analysis, and taking on the hottest topics around women's basketball. Plus, we're bringing in the biggest names in the game to weigh in on all the action. So mark your calendars because no off-season, The Athletic Women's Basketball Show is launching Monday, March 17th with fresh episodes every Tuesday and Friday. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Next up, Chuck says, is it fair to say that for the purposes of the rankings, the FP sessions can only hurt, not help drivers? Behrman is certainly high without his struggles in practice, in my opinion, but it would be absence of said struggles that boosted him, not anything he did in practice, unless there was something truly magnificent. Yeah, it's really, really hard to do much to boost you in practice. Problems in practice not of your own making. Like occasionally you get someone who has an absolute nightmare of a weekend and they have about 3 laps and they do well in qualifying. You think, oh, that's quite good. But yeah, mainly practice is going to hinder you. There's a little bit there and you build up a little bit of a picture and you can use it to support where a driver's pace is relative to their teammate, provided they're on similar programs and setups. But I think your statement there that free practice sessions can only hurt, not help drivers, I think broadly is absolutely correct. There's a few more questions that are a little bit more general, so I'll pile through those and comment on what I think. David Tripler says Antonelli could be a position or two higher because I think he might be the driver who impressed me most in the race, which should make up for his earlier weekend struggles. I also think this might be one of the cases where outside metrics like expectation should factor in. Performing like this in your very first race should give you bonus points, especially if you compare it to how much every other rookie struggled. But it's also understandable to have Russell and Tsunoda higher because they also did very well and were tidier overall. I would say on Antonelli, think about how you would perceive his race if he'd finished, let's say, 10th from 16th, because that's where he was when he actually jumped up to 5th through that pit stop call from the team, and then he passed Albon, which is good. You're right, it was impressive from Antonelli, but he did have some fortune that boosted that result up to 4th, and he did have that spin during the race that cost him as well. So I don't think it was a rookie debut for the ages for Antonelli. I was impressed. He did well to finish and not make a blunder that put him out of the race, though he did make an error. So yeah. I mean, he could be a little bit higher, but although there is a bit of a rookie boost, I didn't think it was a 16th to 4th place charge entirely. There were, you could probably say, 4 or 5 places that were gained through that strategy. Another question, I might well swap Stroll and Hulkenberg because Stroll had the more complete performance if you factor in qualifying. They were probably much of a muchness. I would say Stroll was always slower than Alonso. Hulkenberg was actually quicker than Bortoletto, but that last run didn't quite come back together. But yeah, they're close. They're really close, I would say. If you had them the other way around, I would in no way riot or question it. I think perfectly fine. I think the Sainz and Hajar ratings are harsh compared to people like Berman or Lawson. You explained your reasoning on this before, but I don't think in this case making one very bad mistake on the formation lap or behind the safety car is worse than having absolutely shambolic weekends, as Berman and Lawson did. The negative impact on the teams, no points in a repair bill, were just as bad with Lawson and Berman too, if not worse. Yeah, you can argue that. That's a perfectly reasonable position. I tend to go with because getting around the formation lap, because lapping under the safety car is such a fundamental basic, I count against it much harder than what I would call a normal racing mistake. But again, I don't look at your reasoning there and think you are talking complete nonsense, because you make a perfectly reasonable case. Jake Britton says, 9th, I would say, is incredibly harsh on Piastri. He was quicker than Norris once he managed to pass Verstappen and was looking like he was going to pass him on track until the intervention of team orders halted him in his tracks. Both Norris and Piastri making the same mistake, albeit with different consequences, shouldn't lead to such a big difference in ratings. Yeah, you can make that case. Interesting that there's a comment that it's harsh on Piastri to be 9th, and there was one earlier that said it was generous for him to be 9th. The fact is that I think probably Norris and Piastri, really it was only luck that made a difference between the two of them. But Norris did get out of it. Therefore, Piastri could have got away with it. So how do you factor the driver in there? I don't know. It was a slightly different trajectory Piastri was on. If he was being fractionally more conservative because they knew the rain was there, because I think he did carry more speed in than Norris, that would have made a difference. So we're in ifs and buts there. In my ideal world, I'd have an alternative universe and I'd just change the pace and approach and the drivers endlessly between Norris and Piastri to see if you do enough simulations what happens, and then work out whether it's luck or whether it was statistically significant that Piastri spun and Norris didn't. But there's no way of telling that. So I think the bottom line is he went off and he turned a potential win, a certain podium, into 9th place, and that kind of has to count against you because Norris showed he could have escaped it. Gareth Anstey says, my only criticism would be Sainz, assuming it was a car issue that caused the spin, and his pacing quality relative to Albon being below those who spun multiple times feels harsh. Yeah, well, I don't think it was a car issue. It was a car peculiarity, something specific about the way it worked. It was down to the safety car mode and the upshift, and just caught him out. So it was a lack of knowledge. But believe me, Carlos will be kicking himself for that. I don't think he will be letting himself off on that. So again, it wasn't a normal mistake for me. It was a fundamental. You've got to be able to deal with that, and yeah, just a bit unfortunate. Ben says, honestly, I think Hajar is judged too harshly. He showed better than many of us thought he would. Guess I'd have placed Sainz last. He might have done better with all of his experience. Yeah, you could do it that way round. I've kind of explained mine. Cardinal sin is going off on the formation lap, and going off onto the safety car is slightly lesser sin. So yeah, if they're the other way around, it's not a major thing, and it depends on how generous you want to be with rookie drivers. But Hajar knew the conditions and knew he had to be very, very careful, and it's just unfortunate. It's so easy to do, and it's not going to be one of these things I hold against him. I was still overall actually quite impressed with his weekend, despite that, but I just had to put him down at the bottom. Well, thanks to everyone for your feedback. It's really interesting to get different perspectives and try and explain my method a little bit. As I say, we'll do this after every single race, and the more specific the question, I would say, the better, just because that gives me something to really latch onto. And I'm always interested as well if people have different perspectives on how they would do things. And normally all I can do, as I've said here, is, oh, well, yeah, you could argue that way round makes sense. which isn't necessarily that interesting, but what's interesting in that discussion is just how people weight different things. Everyone's got their own system, particularly with a ranking like this. So sometimes it's just good to chuck ideas around and just get different perspectives on how you can do things. So thanks to everybody who interacted. China this weekend, I'm already here, so I'm going to be compiling the rankings from Friday. As we've established, practice isn't that important, but I will be watching. I should add, actually, practice does inform a little bit how well the drivers are performing just in general in terms of how comfortable they are with the car. That impression, particularly from trackside. So that's a little part of it as well I didn't mention earlier. But yeah, I'll be back this time next week to take on your questions about my Chinese Grand Prix rankings.